Welcome back, focused learners. Today on The Explainer, we are embarking on what I like to call the great biological investigation. Think of this whole thing as a thrilling detective story. Our main objective? Well, we want to uncover the mechanics behind the ultimate family tree, the deep, shared history of literally every living thing on Earth. We've got clues, we've got suspects, and we've even got a brilliant lead investigator.
So, to kick us off, I want you to picture something. Imagine you're flipping through a dusty old family photo album. You look at a picture of your great-great-great-grandmother and realize, no way, she has my exact nose. That family resemblance stretches way back through time, right? Well, in a very similar way, all living species share a massive family history. But instead of photographs, our album is made of fossils, anatomy, and DNA. The crazy thing is, the clues connecting your nose to your ancestors are the exact same types of clues connecting a human arm to a whale's flipper.
To crack this case, we're going to follow a four-step game plan. First, we'll look at the evidence for evolution. Then, we'll dig into Darwin and natural selection. After that, we'll explore some other mechanisms of evolution. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with speciation and the family tree. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The evidence for evolution. All right, so our first major piece of evidence is the fossil record, which acts kind of like a chronological archive of life on Earth. When you look at the rock layers, the pattern is just undeniable. The deepest, oldest layers contain simpler, single-celled organisms, while the more complex life only shows up in the younger, shallower layers. But the real smoking guns here are what we call transitional fossils. Take Tiktaalik, for example. It's this absolutely incredible creature that literally bridges the gap between water and land. It has the scales and fins of a fish, but it also has the flat skull and limb-like fin bones of a land-dwelling amphibian. Plus, the fossil record reveals a pretty stark truth. Extinction is incredibly common.
Now, think about the contrast between two very different types of anatomy. First, we have homologous structures. Picture a human arm, a cat's leg, a bat's wing, and a whale's flipper. They all have completely different everyday functions, grasping, running, flying, swimming, but they are built from the exact same skeletal blueprint inherited from a common ancestor. It's like remodeling a house but keeping the same foundation. On the flip side, we have analogous structures, like a bird's wing and a butterfly's wing. These are completely different structures that just happen to evolve independently to solve the exact same problem, which in this case is flight. So homologous structures prove shared ancestry, while analogous structures show how environments shape biology.
And here we arrive at the ultimate molecular smoking gun, 1.2%. That is the tiny, almost unbelievable margin of difference between human DNA and chimpanzee DNA. Every single living organism uses the exact same genetic code. By comparing these DNA sequences, scientists can see exactly how recently two species shared a common ancestor. The fact that our DNA is so incredibly similar to a chimp's proves a very recent common ancestor. And honestly, the fact that we even share genes with something like yeast proves the ancient shared ancestry of all life on the planet.
Moving right along to Section 2. Darwin and natural selection.
You know, Charles Darwin actually didn't invent the idea that species change, but he was the genius who finally figured out the how. Back in 1831, a 22-year-old Darwin boarded the HMS Beagle for a 5-year voyage. He gathered crucial clues, particularly on the Galapagos Islands, where he noticed that finches and tortoises were uniquely adapted to their specific local environments. He spent decades refining his ideas after that trip. Interestingly enough, in 1858, another scientist named Alfred Russel Wallace independently arrived at the exact same theory. That's what finally pushed Darwin to publish his world-changing book on the origin of species in 1859.
The core of his idea elegantly maps out the undeniable logic of natural selection in 5 inevitable steps. First up, variation. Individuals in any population have slightly different heritable traits. Second, overproduction. Species produce way more offspring than can possibly survive. Third, competition. Because resources are limited, those offspring have to compete. Fourth is differential survival. Basically, individuals with advantageous traits are just more likely to survive and reproduce. And finally, adaptation. Over generations, those advantageous traits become the norm for the whole population. It's really a brilliant, undeniable logical engine.
Now, I want to be super clear here. This is absolutely not just ancient history. We can actually watch it happen. During the Industrial Revolution, pollution darkened the tree bark in England. Suddenly, light-colored peppered moths stood out like sore thumbs to predators, while the rare dark-colored moths were perfectly camouflaged.
In almost no time at all, the entire population shifted to mostly dark moths. Or look at the Galapagos finches studied by the Grants. During a really severe drought, only large, hard seeds were left. Finches with slightly larger, stronger beaks survived at much higher rates. In just a single generation, the average beak size of the entire population measurably increased. It's amazing.
All right, let's dive into Section 3, Other Mechanisms of Evolution. Before we look at those other forces, we've got to clear up a really common misconception. The crucial point is this. In biology, fitness does not mean hitting the gym, being the strongest, or being the fastest. Not at all. It simply means an organism's ability to survive and produce the most surviving offspring in its specific environment. A totally camouflaged moth that barely moves but survives to lay thousands of eggs, that moth is infinitely more fit than a super strong, fast moth that gets eaten before it can reproduce.
But natural selection isn't the whole story. Allele frequencies in a gene pool can change entirely by random chance. We call this genetic drift. Imagine a disaster like a forest fire wipes out most of a population. The few survivors are just a random sample. Their genes dictate the future of the population, not because they were the fittest, but simply because they were lucky. We call that the bottleneck effect. Similarly, if a tiny, completely random group wanders off and colonizes a brand new island, they bring only a small fraction of the original genetic diversity with them. That's the founder effect. Both of these change the trajectory of evolution purely by random chance.
So you might be wondering, how do we actually know if a population is currently evolving? Well, scientists use something called the Hardy-Weinberg principle. Think of this kind of like Newton's first law of motion, but for biology. It states that for a population to not evolve, 5 super strict conditions have to be met. No natural selection, no genetic drift, no gene flow, no mutation, and completely random mating. Because no natural population in the real world ever meets all 5 of these conditions simultaneously, it proves that evolution is absolutely continuously occurring everywhere. It basically provides a baseline to measure how fast and in what ways a population is changing.
And that brings us to our final section, number 4, Speciation and the family tree.
The most common way a brand new species is born is through something called allopatric speciation. It usually starts with a simple geographic divide. Maybe a new mountain range slowly rises, a river completely changes course, or even a highway is built. Boom! A single population is physically split in two. Gene flow between them completely stops. Over thousands of years, each isolated group adapts to its own unique environment and experiences its own random genetic drift. Eventually, they accumulate so many genetic differences that even if that physical barrier was removed, they could no longer interbreed. One species has permanently become 2.
But as much as life grows, the tree of life is heavily pruned, 99%. Let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering estimate of how many species that have ever lived on Earth are now completely extinct. Whether through the slow, steady churn of background extinction or massive catastrophic events, like that famous asteroid that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs, extinction is a huge natural part of life's history. It essentially clears the board, which allows the surviving species to rapidly diversify and fill all those empty ecological niches.
So how do scientists organize the 1% of survivors? They use what's called a cladogram. Think of it as an evolutionary family tree that's based on shared DNA and ancestry, rather than just what an animal looks like. The tips of the branches are the living species today. The nodes, which are the spots where the branches split apart, represent common ancestors, and the branches themselves are defined by shared derived characters. For example, mammals, birds, and reptiles all share the derived character of an amniotic egg, which firmly distinguishes them from amphibians. It's literally a map of biological history.
To wrap things up, I want to leave you with a thought about the world today. We talked earlier about natural selection happening in real time, but nowhere is this more absolutely critical than with bacteria. Because bacteria reproduce every 20 minutes in populations of billions, they can evolve resistance to our antibiotics in a matter of days. It is quite literally evolution and fast forward. So, as you look around at the incredible diversity of life today, ask yourself, if the invisible world is evolving this rapidly right under our noses, how much is the rest of the biological world changing around us every single second? Thanks for joining me on this investigation, focused learners. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.